few more slides showing the inner London boroughs. The next one is Islington. Again, nothing too interesting from the tourist point of view. However, it houses the Arsenal Club, the football club, and also this is the place where King's Cross station is located, which is probably most interesting for all the fans of the Harry Potter books and films. Yes, there is platform 9 and 3/4 here in King's Cross station. We are moving to the west now, so again the next borough will be very interesting. This is the borough of Camden. So as I mentioned already, it houses parts of the West End, so this entertainment neighborhood in London, and also Regent's Park, one of the very interesting parks, housing the zoological garden as well. Some other areas within the borough of Camden are Camden Town, Bloomsbury, Fitzrovia, Hampstead, Holborn, Primrose Hill, St Pancras, and as I said, Regent's Park and West End. Some of these places were very fashionable at the turn of the 20th century. Bloomsbury, you may be familiar with Bloomsbury Group, so this kind of unofficial club or a group of friends and lovers from the turn of the 20th century who were artists and writers. Probably the most famous would be Virginia Woolf, so the modernist, rebellious young people from rich background living there. Fitzrovia is also quite fashionable. We have some interesting things there. First of all, the British Museum. The British Museum is situated in the borough of Camden. It houses one of the best collections of ancient art and artistic artifacts, cultural artifacts from around the world, basically. Some people, like the Greeks, are quite upset because one of the treasures of the British Museum are the sculptures, the original sculptures from the Parthenon in Athens, and they would really like to have them back. I'm not sure it's going to happen. There are also all kinds of treasures. Some say it's like a kind of den of robbers, den of thieves, with treasures brought from all around the world by the British explorers and colonial administrations. This is like the best of the British Empire, so now it's a bit problematic, I would say, in the modern world, but still one of the best museums in the world, full stop. Another interesting thing that is located in Camden are the Inns of Court, so the legal headquarters, and these are like the colleges, 4 of them, colleges educating and housing the offices of the most important lawyers. So one of them here is in the photograph, Lincoln's Inn. As you can see, they're quite beautiful. They look like kind of medieval colleges, a little bit like Oxford and Cambridge, because they are basically based on this concept. Then we have 3 more boroughs situated further away from the river. So they are here at the end of this part. Newham, which is in the east, so it's perhaps not the best location to see historical relics. It's very multicultural, so it's good for exotic food. If you like some ethnic restaurants, That's a place to go probably. And recently the London Stadium was built here for the Olympic Games. Another one is Haringey, and we have some rather famous and kind of recognizable boroughs, not boroughs, areas there. Tottenham, Seven Sisters, Highgate and Little Russia. Little Russia was originally the place where the immigrants from Russia would settle. It is interesting. I don't think many Russians still live there, but the idea that the immigrants from different places in the world would go to London. London has always been a very cosmopolitan city, and those immigrants tended to settle in specific locations. It differs from one historical period to another. So probably, I guess in the 19th century probably, or maybe even earlier, the Russians would settle in Haringey. Now, I'm not sure, I would have to check whether most of the Russian immigrants live now, but definitely there is a significant group of them. Another interesting place in Haringey is Highgate Cemetery, a Victorian cemetery with beautiful effigies and tombs of some famous people. The last borough in inner London is Lewisham, and we have the areas of Blackheath, Deptford, Crystal Palace and Sydenham. Crystal Palace is important. You may have heard about the Crystal Palace being the main venue of the Great Exhibition in London, and I told you it was in Hyde Park, because originally it was in Hyde Park. But after the exhibition closed in 1851, the palace, which was like a giant glass house, was dismantled and moved to another place. So a special park was created for it in the borough of Lewisham, and there it stood for many decades, being a very interesting venue for all kinds of exhibitions, concerts and such, until I think in the interwar period it was destroyed in a fire. Some elements of the exposition that was held inside caught fire, and the heat damaged the glass and the metal construction of the Crystal Palace so badly that it was not rebuilt. So I've never been there, but apparently you can see the outlines of the Crystal Palace still in this park, and from what I heard, a few of the later early 20th century exhibits, like the big sculptures of dinosaurs. I guess they are the only thing that survives from the original Crystal Palace. So now we move to outer London, and the same rule stands. The west is generally more interesting than the east, with perhaps a few exceptions. So these originally were separate towns. So many of them look and feel like separate little towns, and they have their town halls, and you will see some of them in a little moment. So let's start with Brent. Actually, there is one claim to fame for Brent. It is the place where Wembley Stadium is located. So that's it. Another one is Ealing. And again, one claim to fame, the Ealing Film Studios, the original English Hollywood. So from the beginning of the film industry, this is where they had the studios. They are still used to some extent, so there are some sets for film production. As you can see, it's still within Greater London, and it's named after the borough, so something to remember. Then we move to the southwest of London, and this is really something that starts to be very, very interesting. So first, the borough of Hounslow. We start having beautiful residences of historical and cultural importance, belonging originally to the aristocrats who wanted to have a residence near London so they could travel to London on business or to participate in the sittings of the House of Lords, because many of them were titled aristocrats, so with the seats in the House of Lords. So they had those residences, and in the borough of Hounslow, we, for example, have Chiswick House, which is this beautiful villa in this neoclassical Italian style. Then we have Richmond upon Thames, and this is one of the most interesting boroughs ever. It houses a lot of interesting places like Strawberry Hill and Twickenham and Hampton and Kew, and each of them holds treasures. Strawberry Hill and Twickenham are the areas next to the River Thames, with a lot of beautiful historical houses, like the Strawberry Hill House, belonging to the creator of the first Gothic novel, the Castle of Otranto. His name was Walpole, but the first name, Horace. Yes, Horace Walpole. He was the son of the Prime Minister, but yeah, his name was Horace Walpole. His father's name was Robert Walpole, so I was just kind of thinking which one was which. So that's one thing. More interesting houses in Twickenham belonging to historical figures of some importance, like Alexander Pope, for example. And then we have Hampton with Hampton Court Palace, one of the most beautiful royal residences in Britain generally, which was started in the Renaissance period. The earliest part, like here you have the main gate, is in the Tudor style. It was originally built for Cardinal Wolsey, but King Henry VIII liked it so much that he kind of asked for it to be given as a present, and poor Cardinal Wolsey had nothing to do but just to give it to the king. Later, the palace was extended in the Stuart period, in the 17th century, and some more in the 18th century by the early Hanoverians. So it's a wonderful, very complicated system of palaces and courtyards and kitchens and gardens. So one of the wonderful places. Another wonderful place in Richmond upon Thames is Kew Gardens, the main botanical garden in Britain, with some wonderful plant collections and very interesting buildings, like those Victorian glass houses housing the delicate plants from hot climates. So that's one of the most interesting boroughs really in the outer London. Then we have Kingston upon Thames with some nice little towns, and probably the most interesting thing is this one, the Saxon coronation stone, which according to legend was used for crowning the early pre-Norman kings. Then we have Merton, and this is the place where Wimbledon tennis courts and are situated, and Wimbledon championships are held. More recently, the largest mosque in London, I think in Britain generally, was built there. It's called Morden Mosque. It's also in the borough of Merton. Then we have Sutton, which is more rural. It's quite famous for lavender growing and lavender fields. In earlier periods, it housed some royal residences like this very beautiful and famous Tudor palace called Nonsuch Palace, because, well, Henry VIII thought it was the best palace ever, but it was destroyed and does not survive. So it went as an inheritance somewhere, and then it was destroyed by a fire, and eventually it was not rebuilt. So we know it was there. We basically know where it was, but we cannot really visit it. Then we have some mostly residential areas like Croydon. Here we have the town of Croydon, which has this town hall. That's basically it. I guess originally this is where the very first airport was in London. And then we have Bromley, which is mostly residential, not much really to see there. There is the town of Bromley with this kind of modest look. But then we move to another very interesting borough of Greenwich. And there we have lots of interesting things. First of all, another UNESCO site in London, the Royal Naval College. So a beautiful 17th century construction, which was originally designed to house the school for Navy officers in one part, and the hospital, so the kind of place, shelter for naval veterans in the other side. It is beautifully decorated with some frescoes and yeah. Another interesting place, we'll talk about it at a greater length when we talk about the UNESCO sites. The little white house between the two towers, situated a little bit further away, is called the Queen's House, and it's earlier, and it's very, very important for the history of art and architecture. It was one of the first, I would say, modern buildings in the 17th century, designed by another great architect, Inigo Jones. There is the Naval Museum, and there is the Royal Observatory, which is of course the place where you can visit the observatory, and this is the place where the zero meridian is. So all the geographical locations given in the meridians, they are counted from the zero meridian, which runs through the Royal Observatory in Greenwich. What else? A very interesting 19th century ship, the Cutty Sark, which was a sailing ship, very fast, faster than the steam ships that started to dominate in the 19th century, which was used for transporting tea from China. A few more places, Bexley, again, mostly residential. There is one interesting place which I actually visited, it's very interesting. It's called the Red House, and it used to belong to William Morris, one of the great artists and designers of the second half of the 19th century, the founder of the arts and crafts movement. This was the house that he bought, and he decorated according to his taste. He was very fascinated with the Middle Ages, so the furniture and the wallpapers. He's mostly famous for his wallpapers that you can still see in the Red House, which now belongs to. It houses it's a museum, so you can visit it. It belongs to the National Trust. So that's Bexley, and then we have Havering, which is basically residential. Here we have the town of Romford with the town hall, as you can see, quite modern, and some more. We have Barking and Dagenham, mostly comprising two towns of Barking and Dagenham, and you can see the town halls here. Then we have Redbridge with the main town of Ilford. This is apparently also one of the cosmopolitan places with a significant Pakistani minority. So here we have some sort of holiday with a parade and a woman dressed in a traditional way carrying a flag. Then we have Waltham Forest, mostly residential, not much to talk about. Then we have 4 more. Next one is Enfield, and it is remembered, and kind of the name survives in the name of the rifle that was very popular in the 19th century. This was the actual rifle that caused the Indian Mutiny because the native soldiers, either Hindus or Muslims, were not sure. They were asked to, they were ordered to bite off the ends of the bullets to use this new Enfield rifle, and the bullets were greased with some sort of fat, and they wanted to know what kind of fat was used. The officers wouldn't tell them because they thought it was unimportant, and the mutiny started. So this all starts here, the Royal Small Arms Factory. This is where this rifle was designed and produced. Generally, the areas north of London are quite famous for the military connections. We have this factory in Enfield, and in Barnet, just the neighbouring borough, we have the Royal Air Force Museum. So these were the areas with quite a lot of military presence. I think it still holds. 2 more. Harrow. The only claim to fame is the Harrow Public School, one of the famous, very prestigious schools for boys, very expensive. It's called public, but these were of course private schools. Probably the one that is even more famous is Eton, but it is not within the Greater London area. This one, Harrow Public School, is in the borough of Harrow in the Greater London area. And the last one, Hillingdon. The most important thing here is Heathrow Airport. The other airports located outside of the city centre are not within the Greater London area, so Luton and Stansted, we'll talk about them when we talk about the counties of England. So that's the map of England and of London and the London boroughs. You can find the slides on Moodle if you want to see them again, which is a good idea. The last thing I'd like to show you in this part, before we move to the discussion of guidebooks and the wonderful, fascinating history of guidebooks, are a few artistic representations of London, and the first one comes from the 18th century. It is painted by the Italian master Canaletto, who was invited to England, and he painted quite a few views of London. And here we have the parade on the River Thames on Lord Mayor's Day. This is an occasion when there is a boat parade in London. It is let me check the date probably. Okay. It's not a set date. That's why I don't remember. It used to be a set date. It used to be the 9th of November, but now it's the second Saturday in November. So it's not a set date, but something of a celebration in London, and this is marked by the parade of boats on the River Thames. The remaining paintings are from the 19th century, so here we have one by Ford Madox Brown showing the area of Hampstead, which, as you can see, in the middle of the 19th century was completely suburban and rural, and you have a lot of greenery. You have some people having a picnic and small houses with gardens, and that's basically it. We have an old view, again from the middle of the 19th century, by David Roberts, of the Houses of Parliament, and you can see the boats on the Thames, the port actually, and this kind of commercial life being held in the city of London. You can see how downtrodden and neglected the area right next to the Houses of Parliament was. Now it's a beautiful embankment with the parks, and if you go a little bit further down the river, you will get to Tate Museum, Tate Britain Museum. The last slide, John Atkinson Grimshaw, two nighttime images of London. One showing Piccadilly area. You can see the street lamps, of course, gas lighting here. This was something of a specialty of this artist. He painted many streets of many English cities at night, so they're quite beautiful. And let's now move on to the discussion of guidebooks.